Greenwood. Also present, Mike Roth, Patrick Knight. Let's see, Hayden Hinchman and Mary Somnus. Not here. I'm losing things.
Jeff?
And Jeff. Oh yeah, Jeff. Yes, there. Thank you. Yes, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out where I was. So, first item on the agenda. Well, I don't even have my agenda in front of me, so I had it on my other computer. My other computer just died, so I suppose it's the acceptance of the minutes from our previous meeting. I think it's previous 2 meetings actually. I did note that in the September minutes that I was shown to be absent. I might have been absent-minded, but I believe I was physically present.
Noted.
Absent-minded, yes. Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any corrections, additions, changes, or do we have a motion to approve as amended?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. Michael McHugh makes a motion. Michael Gary seconds that motion. All those in favor will go through individually with votes. Let's see. Stacy.
Aye.
Oh, Michael Gary.
Aye.
Michael McHugh.
Aye.
And Tim Kennedy. Aye. The minutes are approved. The agenda for the meeting, any additions or changes to that? And if not, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay. Motion is made by Commissioner Hawkins. Second by Commissioner Gary. All those in favor, and we'll go through the list again. Commissioner Hawkins.
Aye.
Commissioner Gary.
Aye.
Commissioner McHugh.
Aye.
Commissioner Kennedy. Aye. Motion passes. Agenda is set. Now this is where it's going to be complicated because I don't have the agenda in front of me because that was on my other computer. Tell me what's next, Mike.
EDA.
EDA, yes. The request by the EDA to consider housing throughout the business park. And also part of that was a discussion we had at the city council about changing the purpose statement of the EDA zoning district to maybe better reflect what the EDA is trying to accomplish. And I don't know, Mary, do you want to discuss that? Can you unmute? There you go. Good.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking this up for discussion. I believe you all received my memo. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. There's a lot of reasons why I'm asking for this. And it did come up at the city council, and that was going back to the more earlier requests that we had about services. And in the review for that process, we were asked then to look at the purpose statement. And Patrick, I know you emailed to me earlier today. I've been away from my desk and I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm going to take that up with my board next Tuesday, see what thoughts they would have. And I just really want you all to know that I don't feel like the EDA has a different vision, or like we haven't established what we think should be a different purpose. Everything that I'm suggesting about the business park is based on the inquiries that we've received for the last 4 years that I've been here. The world has changed since 2006. The community has changed, and I think the one vision that we have is to fulfill the obligation that we have to sell the lots, to put them to good use for economic development purposes. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody would have, hear your thoughts about what we're talking about or what I'm asking for.
I'll ask you a question.
Go ahead.
So the original idea must have been that we wanted the city wanted businesses, or just distinct businesses. They must have had a grand idea that it was going to be full of all kinds of factories or warehouses or things. Like, why was the original sort of owner-occupied housing option not originally considered in 2006?
And I might be able to answer that, I think, because I was around at that time. I might even have been on the EDA at that time. But what happened prior to the business park actually even being constructed was the EDA went out and solicited for businesses that might be interested in establishing themselves in the business park. And they actually received confirmations, reservation agreements from, I think it was 22 businesses for all of the lots in the business park. And it seemed like it was pretty obvious what the intent or needs of the business community was at that time. Most of those businesses were road building contractors, heavy not industrial, but heavy construction type contractors. And I think that list was sent out, so that you had a chance to take a look at that. None of those, well, I shouldn't say none of those. Only one of those on that list actually purchased a lot when all was said and done, because at that time the recession had started to take hold. Businesses had far different ideas about what their needs were, and it's been an uphill struggle to get businesses to buy lots and develop in the business park, since that date. And slowly things have gotten better, but it's only because prices have been reduced, expectations have changed, and I think what we're seeing today is still interest in developing in the business park, but the council's question at the meeting, their last meeting, when they talked about the change or amendment to the ordinance that would allow services, seemed to not be reflected in the purpose statement of the business development zoning district. And there was concern that maybe that ought to be revisited and evaluated in terms of its current usage and projected use for the future. So that's, and Mary, maybe you want to add something to that, but that's kind of my take on where we are today and why things aren't the way they were in 2006.
Yes, I would agree with everything that Tim said. Now we have I've had like artists that want to have studios and live in the same space who can't afford to build a studio in one location and a house in another location. And that's a change in the community and the view of those who live here. As I said in my memo, there were 12 inquiries, I think, over the last couple of years. In 2018, I brought this forward to a couple of people and requested the same change, and there wasn't no real reception to the idea at that time. But I think, the kind of businesses that we have in Grand Marais and in Cook County, and the kind of people that we have here, just the economy has changed. We've sold 6 of those 8 that were zoned, and as I said in my memo, those last 2 both have wetland issues, and people are looking at other lots and saying, well, this looks like a much more buildable lot to me. I'd rather buy that one and live over there, but I'm sorry, you can't. So since you're looking at housing overall in the city, and then we brought forth this other change, I was like, well, let's just wrap this all up together and do this, have these conversations all at one time, rather than come back in a couple of months and say that I have another idea. Like, let's dig into ordinances, since that's what's going on. Let's look at it some more. So
if Michael, if that addresses some of the questions you might have, kind of how we got to where we are today.
It
I think it's
does.
worth going back in time a little bit more too. That purpose statement wasn't written in 2006. I don't remember when it was written. I wasn't here, but it might have been the 80s. It certainly wasn't any later than the mid 90s. So that the zoning was created and the concept of a business park was created a long time before a business park was actually constructed. And so it's no surprise to me that what it ends up looking like is quite a bit different than what it was envisioned originally. And other than the major economic shifts, there's also the change that when that zoning was created, the Gunflint Trail didn't exist in that location. The Gunflint Trail was Fifth Avenue. So there wasn't a road that brought major traffic to that place. It was kind of a back of the woods dirt trail that you drove to get up there. So then it makes sense to have the bulk propane tank up there. And then you put the Gunflint Trail through, and suddenly that is a really attractive location. It's very accessible, and the ideas of what might make sense there really shift quite a bit. So I think it's great to go back and revisit that purpose statement, and I think the EDA will be able to give us something to work with, to look at your next meeting.
Yeah, we'll take that on, and I think that the need for housing just becomes more profound every day, and I also know that one of the first steps that we're going to have to do is figure out who to get a hold of at Minnesota Deed and learn about that contract that goes back to the funding that was provided at the time. I've skimmed over it, and it seems it's a little bit beyond my understanding of what all the requirements are. It says that the use of the business park has to stay within the terms of a statute that I don't know the statute, but it's the statute that says what business parks can be. So we just have to make sure that either we get an amendment to that agreement, or maybe the time has passed. I don't know. It seems like it was written in perpetuity, but I'm hoping that they'll be amenable to making some adjustments because it's reality. We are not going to fill the business park up with bulldozers and backhoes and manufacturing. It's just not going to happen here. So hopefully we can use that space that's been built with all the infrastructure to meet the needs of our community.
Is there any concern? I mean, what I've read, what I've read and what you've proposed, it makes sense to me. But is there any concern that suddenly, if these lots are turned into these sort of artist studio residences, and you're creating this sort of this kind of, or enticing or bringing in this kind of business, is there any concern that the remaining lots suddenly become less viable because like that one manufacturer who want to come in and make a lot of noise and do a lot of things suddenly says, there's pushback with that? Or is there any concern that suddenly, if it's kind of a residential place, that suddenly you can't have big manufacturing come in there anymore?
Those are good questions, Mike. I think it's always the challenge to maintain that balance, when you start to look at competing uses. That's what kind of the idea of zoning is all about, is to isolate uses that may be in conflict with others from each other. But in some situations where we have our mixed use district, we've acknowledged that there's kind of a transition. Now, I'm not sure if a business park is what you would call a transition district, but certainly, I could certainly see where a business could see some value in being able to house an employee that would be able to work for that business that would benefit them, because it makes the business more viable. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Now, case in point, Max Waller's, wanted to put an apartment in his construction compound, which is right next to the G&G septic disposal site. Now, he was willing to do that and knew that full well that there was a septic site adjacent that may have had conflicting type uses with heavy truck traffic, odors, potential hours of operation, and that kind of thing. But that didn't seem to bother him. It seemed like that might still work for employing or housing an employee that would be able to, assure that his business could run, in a way that benefited, his business. So, I don't know if it's a question we're going to be able to answer, but it's a question that I think is a valid, one when somebody looks at creating a housing opportunity adjacent to something that might be potentially a conflicting type use.
I think it gets back to that purpose statement too. And the question of, do we still think we need a location where we zone for large, noisy things that don't fit in neighborhoods? Or do we think that the chances of that occurring are small enough that we'll take the risk to not have a obvious place to put them? And that's a tough question, because clearly there's not a big manufacturing noisy something that someone wants to do right now, but we don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And if they did show up, then we could always adjust again to make it work. But it'll be a lot harder if we just let 7 new families move into that zone. So I think it's a tricky question.
Stacy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I'm all for creating more housing, and I guess I'm wondering about the owner-occupied, employee-occupied housing. And I started thinking, well, what if the donut shop wanted to have their storage building and put a building up, and then they wanted employee housing? How many employees are we talking about? Could they put up a building for 10 employees that are their seasonal workers? I'm just wondering how this might look and what are the ramifications of just saying, yeah, you can have employee or owner occupied housing.
Yeah, good question. And I would go back to kind of one of the original premises of the business park, and that was to help local businesses, retain local businesses by making things just more workable for them. And whether that's, as you say, locating a warehouse for storage of equipment or storage of inventory or whatever, or adding employee housing so your business is more viable. I mean, to me, these all encourage and promote the success of those businesses. You know, maybe they need storage, maybe they need employees, maybe they need both. You know, I think it's something we need to give some serious thought to.
Can I ask a question about the top portion of that it says, I forget how, it's how many acres it is at the top that says that was meant for housing, 15.52 acres, which brings up another question. So the assessed value doubled in the last year and nothing's happened up there. What would be the reason for the estimated market value to double? Or is there something in the works that makes that land more valuable to somebody? And are we planning on putting housing on that somewhere?
I don't know if that is a question for me. We are not planning anything. I've seen a drawing that shows lots for single family development up there, but I don't know the history of that drawing. I've not spoken with anyone in my time here ever. A lot of people have looked at it and said, well, that'd be a great place to build housing. And then they look at it again and they say, oh, it's all wet. It's not good for building anything. So I don't know, Stacy, the answer to the question about the value. My only guess would be that it finally came around in the county assessor's quintile of updating assessments, and they decided that it hadn't been updated for a long time, and I don't know, but I'm only guessing.
Well, I think maybe the EDA should talk to Bob about that, because I just think doubling a value of that 15 acres, if it's really not buildable, you know, that's kind of just inflating the numbers. And then I'm just wondering that if it is really worth 161, should we be, instead of focusing on putting housing on those lots that are meant for business, should we say, hey, let's turn all of that into housing? Let's make sure that gets developed for housing, which could be your employee housing. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just trying to think of everything that issues that have been raised.
Yeah.
EDA doesn't pay property taxes, so I'm not surprised that they're not worried about what the valuation of that property is, because it really has absolutely no relevance to them. When we looked at, and there's been 3 or 4 different, I think, somewhat serious ideas for doing some housing development up there since 2006. The biggest problem right away is that elevation is above what we can serve with our pressurized water system. So any significant density up there would require some pumping stations to serve municipal water. The map I think Mary's talking about was actually one roof housing that was talking about putting 31 single family lots up there. This was quite some time ago, and before they were one roof housing, and they wanted more than $1 million in tax increment financing, and it was just a super expensive idea that at the time didn't make any sense. And I don't think it probably makes sense now to look at that sort of dense 30 lot type use of the 15 acres. Some other ideas, though, are what if it's not served with municipal utilities and it's just a couple of lots? Or what if it's multifamily buildings that don't need lots of roads or lots of pipe, but it's just a short run of pipe? I think those ideas have some merit and could potentially be something the EDA works on in the future. But it's not, it's different than the rest of the business park. It's not zoned BDA, it's zoned R1 because they wanted it changed to talk about residential uses, but it also isn't affected by the funding and the stipulations attached to the funding because the water and sewer didn't get up there.
Okay. Yeah, and I would add that I wasn't even aware of the change in valuation. I did not receive any information about that. I don't, when I think of Cedar Grove, I really don't think of that land, but I guess it's part of the business park. I'm just not connecting those dots, I guess. But no, yeah, we are paying the special assessments on the lots that were developed, but I have no information about those 15 acres really, other than what I've been told, that it could be used for housing and that others have looked at it in the past. But I'm interested to know this about the water. That's a significant bit of information.
Yeah, and I don't know, hopefully, Stacy, that answers some of your questions. I mean, it is kind of an issue that, has kind of bounced around for a long time because it is zoned R1. There was a plan at one point by the EDA to extend sewer and water to that area and develop a subdivision of residential lots. And when it really was evaluated for that, it was determined that with all the wetlands and drainages that were dissecting that hillside, that it really was not workable to create a sewer subdivision in that location. And if anything, at some future time, maybe there could be some select building sites that could be sold off that would be probably non-municipal sewer. And that's kind of not been a high priority of anybody to really look into that, because it is I would say a marginal quality property with issues. So yeah.
It also brings up some of the problem with the idea of lots of residential use in the business park, and that is that infrastructure was not designed to accommodate it. That road isn't really designed to have significant pedestrian traffic in the area at all. There isn't very much shoulders. There's really no place to walk except for the road. And if it's there's some significant truck traffic that goes to serve some of the businesses up there. If we added another 30 homes, or even 10 for that matter, that there gets to be some conflicts that infrastructure wasn't really designed to serve. And I think that's something that we need to spend some time thinking about and talking about when you do look at this potential change to add residential use up there.
So it's my understanding with this issue of the purpose statement of the business park is that the EDA was going to be taking this up at their next meeting and possibly offering some suggestions or recommendations to the planning commission. I'm not sure what or how the issue of the accessory residential uses were to be addressed. Mike, do you have any ideas on how that could move forward?
I think they're going to take the same path if you're all amenable, which is you can set a public hearing for your next meeting right now to address both of those issues. And we will then have some language from the EDA's meeting next week that we can use when we publish that public hearing. So we'll have the public hearing suggest that we would add the language about accessory dwellings to all of the business park, and then that we would adopt the new purpose statement that the EDA board's going to draft for us next week. Then at that public hearing, you can all hear comments from folks that are involved, and also then have your own discussions about whether you're interested in doing those things. The timing of that is particular with the purpose statement. The city council wanted that process to finish this year. And in order for us to get that done this year, realistically, we really need to have the public hearing at your November meeting, which is coming right up.
So with a public hearing like that, when we don't have any information or a draft in front of us, how would we get that information out to the public so the public could respond? And we've had that concern about just the housing ordinance and the public hearing process for that. Thoughts?
This is a lot simpler, obviously, than the housing ordinance. there's a limited number of people that are directly affected, those folks that own property that is zoned BDA, and then the EDA board itself. So when we publish the public hearing, it'll be in the newspaper that anyone can see, and if they're curious about, they can ask us for more information. And the timing of that is a couple of weeks before the meeting, which means we still have a couple of weeks to actually draft some language that we would have available for folks to look at. That language will include what the EDA comes up with at their meeting next week, and then it'll include, like I said, taking the existing language that we have for those few lots that allows residential as an accessory use, and instead having it be all the lots in the business park. So I don't think it's real complex language. If you'd rather see it first and then set the public hearing, we can either set a special meeting for a couple weeks from now, or we can push this off a little bit later.
Well, one thing I can think is, because this is a little bit more specific to a particular area, that I think there'd be a value in sending a notice to, lot owners in the business park, and also those lot owners that are adjacent on the east side of the business park that would be potentially directly impacted, at least think they might be impacted. So, I mean, I think.
Yeah. Maybe I should have added that whenever we have a zoning change where there's a specific area that's affected, then those folks also get mailed notice. And people, usually the status is those folks that are directly affected, and then folks within 350 feet. So we'll get the houses that are on the east side of the park as well.
Well, commissioners, thoughts on whether we want to try to just set a public hearing, or do we want for our next regular meeting, or do we want to wait until the EDA puts together the language and then call a special meeting?
I have one question I wanted to ask, and forgive me if I'm off track, and I'm not trying to sound accusatory, but in a previous life, I used to work in the mining industry, and I did a lot of contract core drilling out west. And a lot of times I lived in, sort of these kinds of areas that applied, employ housing for places. A lot of it was transit. Sort of often really rough areas. Yeah, I mean, just like they looked rough. Lots of people came and went. I mean, like from a zoning perspective, like if we have owners, when it says we talk about employees of the owners, to ensure oversight, like how do we, I'm sure I'm struggling how to say this, like, how do you maintain the quality of these establishments? I mean, I've lived in a lot of employee housing places, and they get dumpy really fast, some riffraff, you get, how do you maintain the quality of that? Who does that? And it may be an absurd question.
Yeah, I think it falls back on the property owner. I mean, not that we can judge the quality of what somebody chooses to build or how they operate, but business owners may have some ideas about what they expect of their employees.
Well, I often work for employees who didn't really care.
Yeah.
Hi, Sue.
Hello.
I think you're muted still.
So if you move your mouse around on the screen, there should be a microphone. Oh.
Good.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
My dad can't join today, so I forgot to tell you that.
All right.
So,
well, thank you for telling us. So appreciate it. Yep.
all right. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. So, trying to a public hearing. Anybody?
I just want to chime in for a minute. Michael, I would share that concern. So what we've in the business park, people are pretty much complying with the covenants, and I think in some ways it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you provide someone with a nice place, hopefully they have some pride of ownership. And I don't want to be like naive, but I just would hope all things, just hope for the best. And if there is a problem, then I don't know who. The covenants say that the city enforces the covenants, but I've been told the city didn't agree to that. So I don't know. We don't really have any understanding about who's the responsible party. But I mean, in terms of public health and safety, we have those systems in place in the county and the city to address situations if they need law enforcement or some other sort of, management. Then, but so far so good.
Yeah, I'd actually say it's actually very clear whose responsibility it is, Mary. You can't just have any group pass laws and say the city has to enforce them. The only laws that the city has to enforce are adopted by the city council. So, and there actually is situations in town that I won't name that I think, creep into the zone that you're describing, Mr. McHugh, when it comes to employee housing. There are some businesses that have, met their own needs with employee housing and in some ways that I think, cut some corners quality-wise because just for expediency's sake, because it's what it takes. And it can create some situations that are a lot harder for us to deal with when we don't really have a lot of code enforcement mechanisms in the city.
I don't raise the issue because I'm trying to squash it. I just,
No, it's good to think about it. And I would hope that when this actually becomes a public hearing in front of you, that you continue to think about those issues. If it makes you all feel any better about the whole question, we regularly get people that apply for things and set public hearings for them long before you ever see them. So that's kind of standard practice. If a variance or a conditional use permit shows up, it just shows up on your agenda. So, I mean, in this case, you're initiating it. Really, the council has asked you to initiate it. So I don't think that there's a lot of benefit in you waiting to see what it looks like before setting the public hearing. You're going to get your chance to evaluate every word of it at the public hearing.
I guess I don't have a problem with setting the public hearing. I really would like to see the language, though, before, as soon as the EDA agrees to it and when you send the letter out, and not wait until it just shows up in my packet a few days before the meeting. So I have more time to talk to people about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. In fact, I think that if we set this for our November meeting, it gives the EDA a chance to go through their discussions, come up with what they think is a reasonable recommendation, and have that sent out well ahead of our next meeting, and give us time to then consider if we want to make any adjustments or changes or modifications, or have conversations with Mary or Mike or whoever it may be that might help us with this. Because I just don't think we should hurry it along to have a special meeting and try to get this done fast. I mean, we're talking still, relatively quick turnaround anyway with the EDA meeting, I think is next week, Mary. And then getting that information back to the planning commission and have us be able to read through and think about it. The November meeting is probably a pretty good time to do that, I think.
Now, one thing I would hope to see addressed is something that Mike brought up before, was about, people moving in and out of there. Like, I think that we are probably going to see young families in there. I don't think that's, not a possibility. I think it's a high possibility. So I would like to, if there is any way to have that addressed, that would be great.
Okay, then are we in agreement then? We would just prefer just to have this at a regular planning commission meeting in November and not call for a special meeting. I don't think we have to vote on that if we're all in agreement. If you just nod your head, give me a.
It's a great still photo.
Hmm. I'm gonna call Tim and see what's going on.
So in the meantime, I'll add, we meet next week, Tuesday on the 13th. And assuming that we can get this language put together and approved by the EDA board in one sitting, which I'll work on that between now and then, so they have a chance maybe to see it and look at it. So by Tuesday, they're ready to change it or approve it the way as I suggest. I can send it to Mike and he can get it all to you right after that. So by the end of next week, you should have it. If we get it done, you can have it right away.
I hope that the EDA is going to have a discussion though about how many people can be in the accessory dwelling unit. Because I think that I don't know if it really is a big deal, but that is going to come up with some people talking about if this should or should not happen. I mean, if you have 10 employees or you have 2 employees, or is it a family of, I just would like somebody else to have that discussion first so we can kind of make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to think about that. You know, if we put a number to it and a project come forward that wants to do something different than what we thought, then can we still consider it? If it makes a big difference to a business, if it's an economic development project, if they have a plan for why 10 people could live there. I mean, those lots aren't that big, so I don't know how many spaces you could make for people. But, you know, what if you put in like a boarding house kind of a situation? Is that allowed? And that'll be part of the whole conversation with deed too, because I think well, that's just going to be that's a big question before we can go very far down this path. But yeah, I don't know, Stacy. I don't know, you know, how to determine the answer to that question. But it'll be discussed. And the whole pedestrian thing, you know, I know there's not a ton of shoulder, but I just drove through there a little while ago and looked at it again. It's all mowed and it looks to me like I would walk. I have walked there, and there's also that snowmobile trail on the west side. Maybe we could get some grant funds to look at some other ways to do some trail connections that give people a different place to walk or ride a bike than on the road. Because none of us are interested in creating opportunity for conflict. That's not not what I'm up to.
Yeah, and the numbers game, I wouldn't see us getting into it, and I can't imagine you guys getting into it too. I don't know how you would even begin to come up with the number. But I agree with you, Stacy. It'd be nice if we could come up with something to still keep it under some sort of guidelines.
But what is it that you're trying to control? Like, what are you alluding to that? The problem that you're trying to solve by having control?
Oh, yeah, I guess it was just the idea of like how many people, like what is the volume of people living back there? And that was the idea. I assume, Stace, that's what you were getting at. And I agree. I mean, there could, because there's only so many ways to get in and out of there, and you've got people taking left turns, you got people taking right turns, you're walking down the road, somebody's got their dog, you can see how it could get pretty quick.
Yeah, and I've had a couple discussions with people, not that I totally agree with them, but the subject has come up that, wait a minute, our taxpayer dollars were to put businesses there, not to put more housing. I don't want to see the EDA sell it for housing. Now I think owner occupied housing and I think it's a good deal, but I've heard that a couple times now, and I was like, okay, this is going to be an issue. How do we come up and say, that's okay, don't worry about that? I don't know yet.
Yeah, good points. And I think that's probably going to be reserved for our conversation at the public hearing. We'll hear from, people that have opinions and ideas and thoughts, and we'll have the information from the EDA. So we'll move from that point. Next on the agenda, though, is our.
Excuse me. I'm gonna head out. I have some other things to do. But is the next meeting the first Wednesday of November? Is that what
November
it is?
4th.
4th? Okay. I just want to make a note of that. Okay. Thank you all very much. See you next time.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is the zoning housing issues been referred back from the council, and we talked about this last month. Had some ideas, and I hope we've all had a chance to think about what may or may not be acceptable to each of us and how we might proceed forward. I mean, Jeff is here to, I think, help us, but I think our help is going to be just coming together and trying to put together a recommendation back to the city council so that the council can make some kind of a decision. I mean, we've bantered this around, and so I guess with that, I'll open it up to council members to offer any comments, questions, concerns.
Yeah, in general, I've been very happy with what we've produced over the last, feels like 10 years, but it's only been a few. And I don't know. I mean, I think there are places to adjust. Like, I get that there are some areas that people just feel like, no, this many feet of like 30 to 40 or 40 to fine. There are places to compromise, but I think in general, I think we're right in there, and I think we just need to tie up those last little things and say like, yep, okay, we'll compromise there, we'll make that happen, and then be done, because we've put a lot into it, and it looks great, I think.
So with that, Mike, any thoughts on where those adjustments might come in your mind?
Actually, personally, I like it how it is. I mean, I like where it's at. I think a lot of it is reflecting what already is out there. I think people are afraid of change, and this may create some change, but I feel it'll be incremental and slower than most people think. Like, I don't see anybody walking in here and buying up blocks and turning it into bluefin or something like that. That doesn't seem like a realistic view to me. So yeah, I mean, I'm actually pretty solid with how it is.
In our last meeting, there was some discussion of making changes, and we said, wait a second, we've gone through this, it seems solid, and we were going to go to Patrick. Like, Patrick, you were going to try to communicate with the community a little bit more, show them examples. I mean, I'm ready to present this as is, but Patrick or Mike Roth, from your communication efforts, have we heard anything more? Is there anything more to add to this conversation?
We didn't get any more responses after the ones that we received and read in the council meeting. So there was a little bit more publication of the summaries of the the changes and where people could go to view them, some images, and see the whole document.
Stacy, any thoughts on your part? Can't believe it. Turn it on.
I was trying to find my mute button. Okay, yes, I had a conversation the other night with Kelly Swearingen about this. I don't have a problem with what we've done. I think we put a lot of work into this, and I'm happy with what we put forward. Now, I get there's people out there that, think it's too much, and so I agree with Michael Gary. I'm willing to compromise a little bit. If you think 5-foot setbacks are too little, you want to go 7, I'd do that to make this happen. I don't think it's necessary, and Kelly and I had a nice conversation about that. But it just seems, and the problem is this whole COVID thing. If we could all just get into the same room with the maps and honest conversation, this way is really hard. So I think it's hard to make people understand how much work this group has already put into this and how much thought we've put into it. I don't know what the answer is. I'm happy with what we've done. I'm willing to send it back to the council and say, we like it. Be more specific of what you want us to change. That's just where I'm at.
Don't these compromises, these alleged compromises, don't they come up in proposed variances in the future? We put forth the new zoning, you want to build a structure, you say, hey, it's supposed to have so many feet here, I need an extra 2. Isn't that the function? Isn't that a way to create the compromise?
Yeah, the very process is not just to make a change to the standard. It has to do with a specific hardship that prevents you from meeting the requirements of the ordinance. And we have to go through those findings each time we grant a variance. And it's very specific to the property. It becomes precedent settings or potentially precedent setting for future decisions. So we have to be careful about just saying, well, we can just grant a variance to the rule if we, somebody wants to go from 7 feet to 5 feet or 5 feet, whatever. So, I think we have to be careful about that kind of an approach. I think I think you're all right. We put in a lot of time on this, and it's challenging under these, the fact that we can't get the public together, but our process of inviting folks to submit comments and soliciting, really an outreach effort to solicit their comments, I think has been beneficial. I went back through all the comments again and took a look at them. And for the most part, most people didn't have issue with what we were doing. They thought that this was on the right track to helping address issues of affordability in housing. And others did have concerns. And the one thing that struck me about going back through the comments is that there was a number of individuals that expressed concerns about the larger scale apartments, row houses, whatever that could be, and the cottage developments that could be put in the midst of an established residential area, and the changes that might create for those areas. And my only thought about that is that maybe one consideration or adjustment we could make to alleviate some of those concerns is to allow those as conditional use, where individuals would have to go through a process, and it would be based more on the site carrying capacities and the individual circumstances, rather than just an outright approval or allowance by the ordinance. And that's just a thought that I had, is if we felt any level of uncertainty or uncomfort, and I have talked to a couple of people that have felt uncomfortable about that, and what the change to a neighborhood might happen if a row house or a large apartment building was built on a lot within their neighborhood, what that might feel like. Couple other just minor things that I saw in going back through, and these are things that I think I've heard not just regarding the housing issue, but that our definition for building height and creating a definition that's a little bit more absolute or understandable. Our definition, I think, makes it hard for the average person to know where you start the measurement and where you end the measurement, because it talks about mean heights and average elevation, or the average of the elevation between the high and the low point of the ground floor or the base or whatever. And I mean, it doesn't say you measure from this point to that point. It doesn't say measure from the highest point to the lowest point to the highest point. I mean, so it leaves people open to questioning that. I mean, maybe we could come up with a better definition and still accomplish the same thing we're trying to accomplish by being a little clearer. The 4,000 square foot lot area, we talked about this, at our last meeting too, and there was some thought about maybe that could be adjusted. And I'm thinking that, well, if you had a 40-foot lot, and I'm not suggesting we change our minimum lot width, but most of our lots, 40-foot wide lots, are on the avenues, and they're generally 125 feet deep or 130 feet deep, which puts them over 5,000 square feet. If we changed it to 5,000, it really doesn't change much. The only place it really changes is on the streets, where you have those end lots that are not as deep, and maybe sometimes you only have 75 feet deep. So if you had a 40-foot width and a 75-foot deep depth, you don't get, and even some of the examples led me to believe that you can drop a house on a 4,000 square foot lot, and it might not, to me, make sense that you drop it in there and fit it, because it's right up against your neighbors on every direction. Doesn't give you any room. And I've seen some of those people that have those lots on streets that store trailers on the city boulevard. They do all kinds of stuff off of their property because they don't have any room on their property to do anything else. And maybe that would be a reasoning for having a larger lot square footage, to just get it above that 4,000 up to a 5,000 square foot lot. Again, it doesn't make a lot of significant difference, but it might show that we're willing to look at and react and compromise on concerns that have been raised. And I think that, that for me was kind of what I thought about, and kind of felt what was potentially needing to be addressed.
I would like to respond to those. Your first point, we had the same conversation in our last meeting, and Jeff, I think you're going to probably say the same thing. I mean, like, we had these, if you're going to put a row house, you still have height barriers, you still have all the things that you have to fit that still fit the neighborhood. And so, like, I'm not quite sure about that. I do like your second point about, like, do we need more specific, or do we need specific language about measuring height? How do you do, I'd be interested in knowing that. And then the third one, I'm still like, I almost feel like, because we have such a variety of size lots, like, the lot will dictate the house. And if it meets, heights and widths and stuff, like, let people do what they want to do. I don't know why you would, it's like, if you have a 4,000 foot lot, you could put something there, I mean, I just worry about taking away opportunity for some people by having to demand a 5,000 foot lot. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, there's so many different size lots. I don't know why you have to why we have to raise that.
Yeah, my only thought on that is that probably well over 90% of the lots, even if they're 40-foot lots, would still meet the 5,000-foot minimum lot area, just because that's how the city is laid out. And so creating a standard that would never really come into play, it doesn't seem like we're changing anything by requiring a 5,000 square foot lot. And it does seem to address some of people's concerns that 4,000 square feet is too small.
Well, you cut out 10% possibility perhaps. And again, people aren't gonna, I mean, people will make decisions.
Yep, that's true.
If I could, I'd like to just respond to your first point, Tim. And that for larger scale housing, just to remind everybody, the setbacks are larger for those housing types, so they're not the 5-foot setbacks, they're 10-foot setbacks. The building height was not changed, so no, the larger scale housing is not allowed to go above 35 feet. So that's another way of keeping the scale appropriate for the neighborhoods. And then the last thing is the larger scale housing types have larger lot width and area minimums. So they're larger than the 40-foot width and the 4,000 square foot lot. So I think there's a lot of attention on those numbers, but those are not for the larger scale housing types.
Yeah, I understand all that, and I think my only concern is that there are people that responded. Maybe 20% or a quarter of the people that responded, seem to address the concerns about those larger scale developments being mixed in with with single family homes and impacting neighborhoods. And I'm thinking if somebody builds a tiny house, on a lot, then next door all of a sudden somebody builds a 3-story 35-foot tall apartment building, they may never see the light of day. It just concerns that the scale that we're allowing be somehow reflective of the situation rather than just saying it could work. Yeah, it could work. Which I would hope that future planning commissions and councils would see and understand that, but to just blanketly allow it. Maybe it doesn't work in all situations, and maybe we don't want to allow it in all situations.
I'll take this moment then to circle back to one change that we're going to suggest that you recommend or that the council adopts. And I think we brought it up before, and it's what Anton talked about it the first time the council looked at this, which is we don't want to have a maximum setback that we had written in that when we tried to figure out how to do the averaging language where you're talking about existing setbacks being different from what we're allowing. The original ordinance included a minimum and a maximum setback. And although we do have a maximum setback in a couple of our streets downtown because we're looking to have things be pedestrian oriented, it doesn't make as much sense in the residential zone. So I think we want to cut that out of the language.
And I do think it makes sense to clarify the language on height. I think there are people who really, that would make a big difference if we could just clarify that. And that seems like something that we could definitely do.
I actually don't believe the issue is clarity. I think the language is very clear right now. It's very specific right now. It defines an exact measurement point above and below. And I don't think that's where the concern comes from. And I actually do think one of the comments was about making sure that the starting point is fixed in time at some place. And the issue, of course, as we know, is someone's going to bring in fill and then build a 30-foot building on top of it, because that happened. Although maybe notable, it hasn't happened since, so it's not a super common occurrence. But it seemed like the one comment about building height definition was a request that we have to pick some point in time where the elevation of the ground is selected. And I think that becomes really tricky and is worth spending some time thinking about, because pretty much every lot in town has some amount of fill and cut done to it before buildings are constructed on them. And I think it gets back to that same idea of fear of change. And it's not a bad or unreasonable thing to be concerned about change. I think it's a very natural thing for us to get used to what our neighborhood looks like, including the elevation of our neighbor's lot, and expect that it's never going to change. But of course, they have a legal right to bring fill in under our ordinances right now, and they have a legal right to build a structure, in most cases, that's taller than the one that's there, given our ordinances right now. So if you want to talk about building height, I think that probably warrants a little more work than adding it in right now.
Oh, there you go. So with those comments, anybody have any parting thoughts before we try to make a decision and get this back to the council?
I'm not sure. You know, I'm ready to send this to the council, but Mike's point is very interesting about, you know, what do we need to do to consider thinking about as far as this height and fill issue? I'm not sure what to do with that.
I don't think that's specifically tied to the housing issue as much as it could be an amendment or a change that, you know, could be addressed by either us or the council at the council meeting if they felt that was appropriate. I mean, if commissioners feel that this is the recommendation we want to make to them, then I would look for a motion to do that and get it back to the council for their deliberations.
I'll make the motion that we send this on.
I would like to hear from people what they think about changing to 5,000 from the 4,000. Just kind of your thoughts generally, especially you, Stacy.
I am perfectly fine with the 4,000 square foot. I know I've had other people express concerns about that, and I am kind of like Michael McHugh. You know, I think people will build to the lot size. I don't think if you can afford to build a big house that you're going to build right up to the edges, because you're going to want to buy 2 lots because you have more money. But I don't want to, if you don't have that much money, I want to make sure you can build a little house that is your starter home, and we're not saying, nope, you need another 1,000 square foot lot to do that on. That's my feeling. I do wonder about the building height issue, though, that I know there is lots of concern, and I know there's only been a couple times it's been an issue, but I do see that maybe it might be helpful to have a more set, how do we measure this thing? I have heard more comments about that.
Well, I'd be happy to just gather some information for you to look at your next meeting to talk about building height. And then you could potentially look to schedule a public hearing for that in December. I don't think we could go any faster. And I do think, although it's a pretty discrete issue that shouldn't take a super long time to dig through, it's worth spending a little extra time on. And since it wasn't a part of the original housing ordinance at all, it's something that we need to go through the hearing process separately with.
So we do have a motion from Commissioner McHugh to send this to the city council. Do we have a second for that?
I'll second. That's what I do.
Okay, motion, but second by Commissioner Gary. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we will take a vote. Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Gary,
Aye.
Commissioner McHugh,
Aye.
and I will also vote aye, although I may bring those same points that I brought up here to the council to raise those concerns if council so chooses to take them up. But otherwise, the ordinance is going to be passed back to the council in its current form, which is the same form that it was when we referred it to them the first time.
Any objections to including that change about the maximum setback when we bring it back to them?
Nope.
Okay.
So you're just talking about eliminating that one clause where it creates the maximum setback. Yeah, that can be housekeeping change that, yeah, can be easily accommodated. Anything else before we adjourn? Any comments, questions, anything by any commissioners, others? Well, Jeff, it has been a pleasure working with you. Maybe this time it's actually going to go to the council and actually stay there. I appreciate
Extra time isn't a bad thing.
Well,
It just just shows that you're convinced of the changes that have been made. So I think it's positive. It's been great to work with you, though. It doesn't seem like 10 years to me, whoever said that.
Good. All right. Well, we are adjourned. I'll have a good evening. Bye-bye.